Hello and welcome back to the Blue Collar Bible Guy podcast. As always, you know my name's Mike and I'm the Blue Collar Bible Guy. And I'm finally done with my OSHA 30 training. I got my certification test completed and passed, so I don't have to worry about that anymore, and I can focus more time on recording episodes for the podcast. I have kept up in my reading, but we've fallen behind on the episodes between having to file my appeal a couple weeks ago and doing my certification for my OSHA 30. We've fallen behind. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a catch-up episode covering 3 days. Day 71, Judges 17 through 19. Day 72, Judges 20 and 21. And Day 73, which is going to be the entire book of Ruth, which is only 4 chapters. But before we jump in, if this podcast has helped you stay consistent in the Word, take a minute and share it with somebody. Send it to a coworker, send it to someone from church. Invite someone to jump into a Bible study with you and read through the Bible every day in a year, which is what our goal is. And that's how we're going to grow this podcast, one person at a time, staying in the Word. So, if you're ready to go, let's finish Judges and step into the book of Ruth. Part 1, Judges 17 through 19. Here we see personal religion and moral confusion. These chapters show how far Israel's drifted. It's no longer just national disobedience, now it's personal, everyday corruption. In Judges 17, we see a made-up religion. We meet a man named Micah who's created his own version of worship. In Judges 17:6 we read, "In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes." That's the theme of this entire section. Micah builds idols, hires his own priest, and basically creates a custom religion that fits his preferences. And that should sound familiar to everybody. People still do it today, picking and choosing what they like and ignoring what they don't, and then they call it faith. In Judges 18, we see the corrupt leadership. The tribe of Dan steals Micah's idols and takes his priest. That priest doesn't resist. Why? Because he's more interested in position and comfort than in truth. This is what happens when leadership loses conviction, and that is a huge problem in churches and in Christianity today. People are more focused on their position and wealth and less focused on truth, and so they start to compromise what they know is true to begin with for the sake of popularity, and they let truth die out because they like the feeling of being popular. They like the feeling of drawing a crowd, and what they see is numerical growth rather than true spiritual growth within the people. And then Judges 19, we see the moral collapse. Then we come to one of the darkest chapters in the Bible. A Levite and his concubine end up in a city where wicked men surround the house. What follows is pretty disturbing, and it's meant to be. It shows how far Israel's fallen. This is what happens when people abandon God's standard. It doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to chaos and destruction. And that's true in the family, that's true in the workplace, that's true in the church. And we have to guard against it at all costs. We have to guard against this moral collapse by not deviating from the truth. There's a pattern that goes on here that's brought us to this position of moral collapse. And then part 2, we're going to look at Judges 20 and 21. When sin destroys from the inside, the rest of Israel responds to what happened. But instead of careful justice, things escalate into civil war. And here we see a nation at war with itself. The tribe of Benjamin refuses to deal with sin, and the result? Israel turns on itself. Thousands die. In Judges 20 and verse 18, we read, "And the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God and asked counsel of God." Even though they seek God, the situation is already messy because of their earlier compromises. Then we move to the final summary of Judges. The book ends with the same warning we saw earlier. In Judges 21:25, it says again, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes." That's not just a description of Israel. That's a warning for any culture. When God's authority is removed, everyone becomes their own authority, and then things fall apart. Now here's what's powerful. Right after that darkness, we step into the book of Ruth, and everything changes. Part 3 in this podcast is Ruth 1 through 4, the entire book of Ruth. And we're going to see God at work in ordinary life. And this is important for all of us that are doing blue-collar jobs, to understand that God is at work in ordinary, everyday people doing everyday, regular jobs. Ruth takes place during the time of Judges. So while everything we just read is happening, God's quietly working through ordinary people. And we're going to see loyalty in hard times in chapter 1. When you go through chapter 1, you see a story of a family moving away from Bethlehem into the land of Moab. And we see Naomi, who becomes a key character in this book, loses her husband and her sons, and her life is broken because of it. But Ruth stays with her. In Ruth 1:16 we read, "Whither thou goest, I will go. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." So we see here loyalty from Ruth to Naomi, her mother-in-law. Ruth had no reason to go back with her, but Ruth had loyalty to Naomi and to Naomi's God. Naomi must have had a huge spiritual impact on Ruth. We don't hear much about the details of the story through chapter 1, but we see evidence that Naomi must have really been faithful to God and must have really been a teacher to Ruth into what her faith was about, because it had such an impact on Ruth that she wanted to go with her. She shows loyalty and commitment, not based on circumstances, but based on character and based on trust. In Ruth 2, we see faithfulness in small things. Ruth goes to work in the fields to provide. There's no spotlight, no recognition, just faithfulness. And that's where she meets Boaz. And then you jump forward to Ruth 3 and 4, we see the redemption. Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer, a picture of Christ. He steps in to restore what was lost. In Ruth 4:14 we read, "Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman." And here's the big moment. Ruth becomes part of the lineage of King David and ultimately of Jesus Christ. God was working the whole time. Even in the darkest period of Israel's history, God was working through people to maintain his promises to you and me. God had a promise that went out to mankind, and he was preserving it through Israel, and Ruth was part of that preservation of that promise. So what does that mean for us? Judges shows us what happens when people walk away from God. Ruth shows us how God works when people stay faithful. One is chaos, the other is quiet obedience. And here's the truth. Most of life is lived more like Ruth than like Joshua. Ordinary days, simple choices, and quiet faithfulness. Just going in every day, punching the time clock, doing your job, giving your best, feeling like sometimes you're not getting much reward, but you're able to pay your bills and supply for your needs. But really, God's working through you the whole time to build faith in your life, to build your trust in what God's providing for you, and you're going to have little impacts like Naomi did on other people for your faith, if you're focused on God and being faithful the entire time. So some big truths for today. When people reject God's authority, things don't get better. They get worse. Judges proves that. But here's the other thing. You don't need a platform or a title for God to use your life. Ruth didn't lead a nation. She just stayed faithful. And God used that to change history. So, what's our challenge for today? I want you to ask yourself this. Am I drifting like Judges or living faithfully like Ruth? And more specifically, where can I be faithful today? Even if nobody sees it. At work, what can I do to show faithfulness? At home, how can I show faithfulness? In my habits, the things that people don't even see that I'm doing, am I trusting God? And in my time with God, how can I show my faithfulness? Because God does his biggest work through small, consistent obedience. So I hope you got something from Judges and the book of Ruth that's going to encourage you to stay faithful no matter how monotonous your days might be, and understand that there is a true purpose for your life in all the little things that you do. Before I go, I just want to tell you to stay in the Word, stay faithful, and remember, small obedience done daily builds a strong faith over time. I will see you next time on the next episode, which is going to be a long one. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me at bluecollarbibleguy@gmail.com.